I'm so excited to have with us today on our show from London, the hero of the hour, David Collier. David, thank you for being here.
Fleur, thank you so much for inviting me.
Let's start from the end and then we'll go back to the beginning, okay?
However you want to
David Collier is the incredible researcher who discovered the lies of the documentary of the BBC, where they took a little boy and his very painful journey through the Gaza war, and it turns out he's the son of a Hamas minister. And David discovered this by going in, not even that deep, and doing the due diligence that the BBC never bothered to do or actually willfully ignored. And so David's work essentially has created the storm that we needed to start or change the conversation on what's going on with the BBC and their terribly toxic agenda. But I wanted to start with David's story because I love people's journeys. And in fact, David, you came to all of this from the other side. You somehow became you planted yourself as a sort of spy in the Islamist camp, in the pro-Palestine, I would say pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas, anti-Israel space, when you became a student and put on a keffiyeh and pretended to be one of those. So I want to go back there and start your story from there, David.
Well, I mean, I've been living in Israel for 19 years. So I had a very clear vision of what the UK was like. And I left in 1987. And if a student had taken a year off, a gap year in 1987, they would have gone to a kibbutz. You know, it was the thing that students did.
Yeah.
So when I went back in 2006 and I started studying, it was a very different environment. You know, Israel had been demonized by this point.
Yeah.
And I was already online, mainly in forums and things like this, arguing Israel's case. So I wanted to understand exactly what was going on. I want to know your enemy kind of thing.
Absolutely.
So at first it was like a hobby. I thought, okay, I'll go to this event. So I went to the event and, you know, I was listening to what they were speaking, and where they were telling people to buy books, I would buy the books. You know, I would read the material. They were trying to basically take apart the anti-Zionist argument.
Right.
And as it became more and more fascinating, I started, you know, it became more than a hobby. I actually started putting a keffiyeh on. I adopted a completely fake identity online. His name was John. Started to get invited by them to their secret little groups and their meetings. And I spent several years, wasn't even a short thing, several years doing this, until basically my face was a known face in the anti-Zionist movement.
And what did you discover that surprised you? Or perhaps everything surprised you?
The driving force here is anti-Semitism.
Yes.
100% for sure. And you can always split that. It's the motivating factor.
Of course.
What drives someone on a February when it's cold outside to go out and put up a stall and stand outside on the street and hand out leaflets, and it's hate. It really is hate.
Why do they hate us so much? Is it something coming out of the Islamic texts they're being presented? Or in the case of the woke, it's, I don't know, hating Jews for being successful? Where do you see the building blocks of this anti-Semitism in the movement you discovered?
Well, look, I mean, firstly, you're right to split them because there are different forces at work here.
Yeah.
In the UK, one of the major problems we've got in the UK is the changing demographic and the rise of the Islamist forces in the West.
Right.
This has basically added a lot of power to what was already a movement on the left. Alone, I'm not sure if the hard left would pose as big a threat as they do. It's a combination of the two sides. What's driving the anti-Semitism? I think it's a combination of factors. I don't think we should simplify it to say, right, it's down to this or that. We're dealing with an ancient hatred that has morphed, mutated. It's identifiable. It's obviously anti-Semitism. Anybody who turns around and says anti-Zionism isn't anti-Semitism doesn't know the first thing about what they're talking about. It's clearly anti-Semitism.
I agree with you, but I think maybe after October 7th, has it become more obvious? Or still people trying to pretend that it's two different things.
Well, look, I think we're splitting off into camps, actually. I think you're right, that to somebody who still holds any semblance of normality, it's obvious.
It's obvious.
And since October the 7th, it's never been more obvious.
Yeah.
What the scary part is how many people are falling on the other side of the camp where they don't see it. I mean, and we're dealing, I mean, you mentioned the BBC, you're dealing with journalists, you know, that are coming at this with sympathies for radical Islamic terrorist groups.
And they don't see it.
No, obviously not. They don't. You know, when we get to the point where the BBC are, and there was another instance a few days ago.
What, when they were asking for a particular speaker?
No, not even that. I mean, the trouble is we've got so many examples.
We've got so many examples. Well, that's what I'm saying. When there's so many examples, it's an agenda. It's not a mistake or misinformation or a hiccup. It's an agenda.
Absolutely, 100% for sure. The people that are writing this stuff hate the Jewish state.
They do.
That's the starting point here.
And they don't understand that hating the Jewish state is a morphed version of hating the Jew.
No, because they feel it's justified.
Yes.
Because in their mindset and their skewed version of history, they've managed to plug together things that actually make the Palestinians the victims and the Jews an imported aggressor from Europe.
Right. And so you've been doing this incredible work. This is not the first time you've kind of uncovered some plot. Maybe give us one before the BBC one of your other well-known ones.
Well, I think we're actually the one where I had to go public eventually, because I mean I was obviously undercover and hiding the identity for a long time. I ran into trouble when Jeremy Corbyn took over as leader of the Labour Party, because I was handing all this stuff to the media, but it was all from secret groups.
So you were basically involved in the secret groups. They invited you because they thought that John was one of them, and then you take the information and leak it to the media. Would the media react?
I mean, most of the time the media would publish the stories. I mean, they still do. There are friends in the media. Let's not pretend there are friends. Absolutely, friends in the media. So I would hand it, and they would publish. The problem is they've got to get through the legals, and we've got very tight libel laws in the UK.
Right, so there has to be sourced.
Really, really careful about what they're publishing. So when I was handing them stuff from inside secret groups as an anonymous source, it became really problematic. And it was like the media that started to pressure me, look, we need to know who you are, and we need identities, otherwise we can't publish. And I was sitting in a secret Facebook group. That's the difference between a secret Facebook group and a private Facebook group back then. You could see a private Facebook group, you just couldn't see the content. You knew it was there. If you searched for it, you'd find it. Yeah. A secret Facebook group, unless you were actually invited into it, you would never know it was there.
You're locked out unless you're invited in.
No, you wouldn't know it was there. It's not visible at all. The
Right.
group does not exist unless you're invited inside it.
Right.
And I was inside groups with Jeremy Corbyn.
Oh my God.
And it was that. So I put together quite a big report on that particular Facebook group. It's called Palestine Live, and that was probably my first major national story.
And that's when you discovered, or maybe everybody knew, but you discovered that Corbyn really is an anti-Semite. There's no ifs, buts.
It's Corbyn. Yes, I mean Corbyn is one.
He's
of
a
those,
communist, so it's kind of a natural progression of communism, isn't it?
It's an add-on. It's an inherent part of their ideology. We have an identity there against it. So there's a clash.
Yes.
So absolutely, anybody who sits on that part of the political spectrum has anti-Semitism at its, in the core.
And so you kind of broke the silence on what was really going on in these groups, and then I guess came out as a...
Well, there was a period of time when I was both.
Right. Oh my God.
Yeah, there was... and I had, because at that point they knew it was me, but they didn't know who I was, because I had no photos or anything online. So I started getting, the other side started posting pictures from events, sending them with circled faces, saying, is that you, is that you, is that you? And they were trying to triangulate, saying, well, we know he was at this event, and we know he was at this event.
And this is the information that came out, so it must be him.
Yeah.
So they were catching on.
They were catching on. At the end of 2016, it's like the last big hits that I had. I was invited. 2017 was the Balfour Centenary.
Yes.
Right, so it was a major year for BDS, right? Major year.
They really went nuts that year.
So at the end of 2016, the BNC, the National Committee, they had this meeting, roundtable meeting in West London in this industrial estate, and I was invited to that. So I was there. There were about 30 people there, 28 heads of NGOs.
From Labour?
No, not Labour. These are.
This was just the anti-Israel groups.
The PRC, like real hardcore.
The hardcore antis.
Yeah, PFLP associated or Hamas affiliated.
Wow. So you were there.
NGOs. Ben White, who wrote a book on Israeli apartheid, he was and me.
Oh my God.
And we were all discussing strategy for the BDS in the 2017. So I mean, he was a known character.
They could have killed you.
That was the one time I actually really was scared.
Wow.
Because normally, look, you're on campus, and even though campus can be hostile, you don't actually think I'm in danger of being killed.
Yeah.
You
But
know?
there, in an industrial neighborhood.
I was walking up this spiral staircase,
and you were like, anybody could do
in this car park and into this room and that. But it's really,
secret agent. So what happened in that moment?
Just I handed recordings to people that needed to hear the recordings.
And then after that, you couldn't go back, I'm assuming.
Well, there was it all happened really fast. Somebody clocked on to who I was, and they posted a picture of me online, and from that point on.
And that was it. You were outed. You
I still
couldn't
carried
go
on. Well, they knew I still carried on going, but it was no longer,
secret
so much.
Oh wow! So you really went all secret agent. You uncovered all this, and then I guess you decided, well, I'll continue with my research.
Well, because I'd embedded as part of the research, what you do, you embed yourself in online Facebook profiles.
Yeah.
So they've got value because I'm actually inside the other side. So although they know who I am physically,
they don't know that
I still have several
profiles, and you're embedded. So you're still getting the information.
Well, so I didn't want that. It's really vital to have those profiles.
Right.
It's very difficult to do the kind of research I do without those profiles.
That's fascinating.
If somebody, when I go into Facebook, I don't see the same Facebook that you see.
Yeah.
I see something completely different. And some of the time, Facebook hands me, because of the algorithms, hands me the people that I need to see. Because it will recommend them as mutual friends, because
of course,
all
you're the same algorithm.
So it's very handy to have.
And David, so what, when you saw this, going now to the BBC documentary that you've exposed, what made you start to dig a little deeper?
The BBC.
Okay, so tell me.
No, I mean, look, we know we have a problem with the BBC. We've had a problem with the BBC for decades. So since October the 7th, I have spent a disproportionate amount of my time looking at BBC content and finding problems with their, the stuff that they publish. So when I knew the documentary was coming out, for me that was already a red flag.
Right.
Then the documentary was aired. And
so they actually aired it?
Yeah, they showed it on
and you watched
Monday
it?
night. I didn't watch all of it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the truth. I didn't need to watch all of it.
Right.
I think I watched all of it later.
Right.
When I went through over the way that some words have been translated and things like this. But initially, it was about grabbing the faces and saying, okay, who are these people? Because at the end of the day, this is what this is all about. Everybody that turns up on those LTT, with the media, in the news, they're witnesses, they're doctors, they're all human beings.
Yeah.
They all have a position, a role in Gaza.
Yeah.
And it's possible most of the time to flesh them out,
yeah.
to find them and to see who they are, who are their family members, and so on and so forth. So I did a reverse facial recognition on the child, Abdullah, who was the narrator.
The narrator speaks very good English.
Yeah.
A very charming boy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, absolutely. He's been in training for a long time.
He's been trained for a long time, you can tell.
So I did a reverse image on him, and I got a hit from a Channel 4 news broadcast.
Right. From
November 2023.
Okay.
And it gave me his name and his father.
So he was in a channel, is another documentary, as himself and his father?
Oh, so I thought.
Okay.
So I thought.
Okay.
So I thought, okay, so now I have his father and I have his name. That's great. So I started doing some searches for his father. And I found him, and he was a director of Adamir in Gaza, which is a PFLP-associated NGO. I thought, okay, fine. So I was looking at his timeline, and I saw a picture of Abdullah, the boy.
Okay.
which you'd expect if that's the father and son, only it wasn't his son.
Okay.
He named him, and he said it was his nephew. So I thought, okay, so Channel 4 has that wrong. They've given me the wrong father and the wrong name. So now, I'm beginning to get curious.
And the BBC also.
Well, the BBC only gave him the name of Abdullah.
Oh, there was no father there.
I
Okay.
did, no father, no anything.
Right.
So so suddenly I realised I had now his full name and realised that his uncle was the director of the PFLP, Associated NGO. So I needed to find the father.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, if he's the uncle, then his family name is not the same family name, right? They've got different family names.
Yes.
Which means it's a sister.
It's a sister.
Who's married out.
Yes.
To another, but with that family name. So
Yeah.
I started looking for anywhere on his timeline where he
The
mentions
father's, when he mentions
the uncle's timeline.
the uncle's timeline where he mentions his sister.
It's quite confusing, isn't it? Yeah.
Wow.
The uncle stroke father timeline. See if he ever mentioned his sister or anyone with that family name.
Right.
And I got a hit of him sitting next to a man, saying, "This is my brother-in-law. It's great." And I thought, right, this has to be Abdullah's father. So I go onto his timeline, and it wasn't even hidden. Facebook, you can put your career, your positions, and there it was. He was just sitting there. He says, I am Hamas. And it was that simple. It really was.
And that's all you needed?
Look, it took about 3 hours for me to know there was a big thing. I have messages on my phone I was sending to friends at about 1 o'clock in the morning, and all I wrote was OMG. Because I couldn't believe it. So
it took you 3 hours to do something that the BBC did do nothing, or maybe they did it willingly.
Look, we can bring up another recent example. They aren't looking.
They're not looking. They have an agenda.
They have an agenda. They believe that they understand, and they have this, and their agenda is obvious.
Their agenda is obvious. And it's it's a news channel that is paid for by the British public. Are the British public beginning to wake up, or they don't really get involved?
we in some ways we have a similar issue to the Jeremy Corbyn issue. Jeremy Corbyn lost badly in 2019.
Yeah.
But it wasn't about anti-Semitism.
No.
It was because there were enough things about him that the British people didn't like.
They smelled a rat.
Other than that, it was the IRA connections, it's the Marxist and communist stuff that the British people rejected. Anti-Semitism was incidental.
Yeah.
So, yes, the British people are waking up to the problems of the BBC, but it's more about British people realising how woke the BBC is, about the BBC's progressive agenda.
Yes.
So when, for example, as what happened, I found them in bed with Hamas, it made national news everywhere.
It did.
Because the Allies wanted to use it. They don't care, really, that the BBC have been caught in bed with Hamas, but they don't like the BBC.
They don't like the BBC.
So they can go for the BBC the same way they went for Corbyn.
But also, part of the scandal was that the BBC had paid this boy, or had paid his family, and is the money in the hands of Hamas, taxpayer money. That was a big part of this story, right?
There's lots of, you're right, there's so much in this story, which is why it is so good, because it's a powerful piece of evidence that they're not going to be able to so easily dismiss. We've found the BBC, or we've caught the BBC doing many bad things.
Yeah.
And they always come up with an excuse, and they always, not this time. There's no excuse. There is no way this happened without catastrophic failures on the part of the BBC. We can argue about the motivations, but catastrophic failures that need to be addressed.
Basic journalistic standards.
Well, across the board, though.
Yeah.
It's impossible to understand how it could have happened. How did it happen?
How it could have happened other than an agenda.
Well, yes, unless everybody is closing their eyes deliberately. Unless that's happening deliberately.
But that's part of the agenda.
And it's because the way that news comes out from Gaza, it's a supply chain.
Of course.
That starts with Hamas and ends up with, and it doesn't matter whether we're talking about the BBC or Channel 4 or ITV or Sky News or CNN or the NYT or...
They're getting the news from Hamas.
It's all the same supply chain.
Yeah.
that is dependent on Hamas-affiliated or Islamic Jihad-affiliated journalists in Gaza.
Yeah.
That's the source of everything that's coming out.
Yeah.
And it's so obvious that any decent journalist would know this.
Yeah.
And yet we look at the state of world media, and it's horrific.
You know what always surprised me? I guess it shouldn't surprise me, but Hamas had captured a BBC journalist as a hostage about 15 years ago. Do you remember that?
Vaguely,
Alan Johnson, I think his name was.
That's right.
They kept him there for 6 months, a year. I mean, you think they'd know better. And he never said a word when he came out. He never, did his debrief interview. It beggars belief, really beggars belief.
Well, I mean, something that I'm working on at the moment is trying to calculate what percentage of journalists who are writing in the West on Israel are ex-Al Jazeera staffers.
Yes, and we all know that Al Jazeera employs active terrorists or
yes.
people, card-carrying members of Hamas.
The head of the Al Jazeera branch in Gaza is Islamic Jihad royalty. His family, his whole family, his brother was killed Islamic Jihad terrorist.
Yeah.
His uncle ran the military Islamic Jihad. This is the head of the bureau.
They're saying that Israel killed 2 journalists in the last couple of days, but in fact they're terrorists.
Well, you would imagine so. Yeah.
I mean, they're not, not by chance did they.
Look, I did when the numbers were about, I think 100, when they were claiming it was about 110 journalists. This was last February or March 2024. I actually went through them all. And well, the starting point was about 70 or 80% of them had celebrated the terrorist attack in Jerusalem on the 27th of January 2023, the one that killed 7 people out.
Yeah, in the synagogue, outside the synagogue.
Across their timelines, celebrating these terrorist attacks. And yes, half of them at least directly work for Hamas or Islamic Jihad channels. Yeah,
I mean, I would suggest also that the other half are somehow.
Well, yeah.
Also, some of them also went along on October 7th.
Gazan society is Gazan society. It's clan-based.
Yeah.
You don't get to a position of power in Gaza. You don't get to a position of authority. You don't get anything unless your clan holds weight with Hamas or Islamic Jihad.
Right. And a position of authority is being a journalist, you're saying?
Well,
that is a good job there.
Absolutely. You're, in other words, I always say there are 2 key industries in Gaza. One is being a terrorist, and the other is telling lies about the people who are terrorists.
So one is terrorist, one's propaganda.
Journalists.
For the terrorists.
They call themselves journalists. Those are the 2 key industries at the moment in Gaza, without a doubt. And just as the BBC recently did an article after Israel renewed the attacks on Gaza. Now, it was obvious to anyone with any sense, because the attacks on Gaza last week, the renewal of the attacks, Israel has obviously been sitting gathering intelligence while it was quiet. In other words, those initial attacks would have been very carefully targeted. Yeah. There was no mistakes there. They knew exactly what they were doing. And anybody with any sense would know this. So the BBC, they fall into this, because of the agenda, this hole of saying, okay, lots of people have been killed, let's go and find them. So they go and they find 2 fathers, 2 grieving fathers. And they interview these 2 grieving fathers. One had lost his baby and his pregnant wife, and the other had lost his 3 boys. And these people they got killed. Yeah. So I found both of the fathers. One of the fathers, his uncle, was the head of the military for the Palestinian Resistance Committees, which is another jihadist organization. And his wife was the niece of one of the heads of the military branch of Islamic Jihad. I mean, it's like a marriage between these 2 powerful... And the BBC put him on like he's some kind of innocent civilian.
Well, they never attribute who these people are. They sometimes lie or don't say, they're also this.
No, for sure.
And also they present terrorists as journalists all the time.
Or doctors. Or medics or anything. Yeah. But yes, absolutely.
So where do we go from here, David? If people are beginning to wake up, the incredible work you're doing is getting a lot of attention. What Can the government, is there any will in this particular government to do anything? Are they going to find themselves in a position with no choice because the taxpayers are going to say, well, we don't want to pay our license fees anymore?
I think we're in, we've got trouble with legacy media across the board, because it is now operating in an environment where it's losing.
Well, it's losing viewers, isn't it?
Yes, it's getting ever more desperate in the search for clicks.
But that makes them more and more fringe, maybe more.
Well, it makes them more
extreme.
Extreme, yes. More careless. Yeah. I mean, when I was growing up, you had a newspaper that would publish once a day, have like 30 pages. You'd have a news broadcast at 6 o'clock, 8 o'clock maybe, that was it.
Yeah.
So the entire news teams were built around that. Outlets like the Daily Mail must put up hundreds and hundreds of articles every single day.
Yeah.
It's impossible to maintain quality standards. Impossible. So I think they're in trouble. I don't think it's salvageable. I think the rise of the alternative media, I think the days of maybe you'll have one or two quality outlets left, but I think most of them are in trouble. As for the things like the BBC, with what's just happened, we have to hold them to account. This is not about getting an apology. We have caught them. We've caught them so badly. And this is something that catches them, not just with a journalist, to the top, all the way. The entire network, the supply chain is tainted and needs to be torn down effectively.
So there's been a couple of prominent ex-BBC chiefs, bosses who've come out against the BBC. Do you think that's genuine? Do you think people actually want to do anything about it?
I do. I think, I would imagine classic British, I think they have this affinity, they have this love for the BBC. So I would say that there are genuine sympathies with some people who would prefer a working, functional BBC. So I think it's real, and I think they can be trusted. I have contact with, I had a phone call from a journalist, BBC, female, about a month and a half ago. She was in tears. She's been working there for two decades and just crying her way. She doesn't know what to do.
She knows that there's institutional bias.
Most of the Jews working there know there's
the Jews working there are miserable.
Yes, they are.
I mean, they have support groups.
Yeah, they do. They can't. They're not allowed to write on Israel. They're not allowed to write on it. It's crazy, the situation.
Which is racist in itself, isn't it?
Yeah, of course it is. Absolutely
racist in itself.
Yeah.
That's basically, being discriminated for being Jewish to write about a topic that you could actually give some insight into.
Especially as half of the people writing on the Israel issue are from Egypt or Lebanon or Iraq or
English Arabists.
Or English Arabists. So on that side it's okay, but if you're Jewish you can't write about Israel.
Exactly. It's incredible. And so is there actual actionable things that are happening right now that you're involved with in order to bring them to account?
We're actually in limbo at the moment.
Right.
Because the BBC are off doing their thing. They're doing their investigations. So,
right. So they've said we're investigating. But didn't somebody actually leave her position?
Yes.
The head of content or something, or the head of news?
Yeah, but this is
Was she a sacrificial lamb?
No, it's a side issue. It's not part of the big story.
Part of this.
Not really. We're waiting for them to see how they react. There are rumblings that it's actually quite serious, being taken quite seriously. There are rumblings. But until they actually make that statement, until they come out and tell us what they're doing, we can't move. What I can say is we're very unlikely to accept whatever it is the BBC say here.
What a half-assed apology.
Well, look, I don't think there is, given what I know about the BBC and how much research I've done, the BBC's entire Middle East department needs to be stripped away.
Right.
And rebuilt. All of it. BBC Arabic has to be defunded and removed.
They're almost as bad. I think Assassin said this. BBC Arabic is as bad, in some cases even worse than Al Jazeera.
It's worse than Al Jazeera. Wow. I think it's worse than Al Jazeera. But it has no function. And they have to rebuild it. Because the problem we have is that people who are writing about this in London speak neither Hebrew nor Arabic. They don't understand Palestinian culture at all. And they're trying to write an article. So they are entirely dependent on Arabists.
Yeah. who translate the region
translate
for them and who have an agenda.
In other words, that when we turn around and say BBC Arabic is worse than Al Jazeera, we also have to understand that every single article that is written about Gaza has BBC Arabic DNA.
Yeah,
And
true.
It
It
has
comes
to.
from there first and then it goes to
It
English.
has to.
Yes.
They have to be the people finding
Yes.
the people to interview. They're the ones with the fixers and the
Yeah.
runners. Everything that's happening
And
in
they're
Gaza.
all, the Gaza fixers and runners are all Hamas.
Of course they are.
And nobody's admitting or even care about it.
No.
Even care about it.
I mean, the co-producer of the BBC documentary, Youssef Hamash, he's Palestinian.
So
And the
there you
BBC just basically gave him the keys and just said,
Yeah.
yeah, go produce a documentary.
But God forbid a Jew should be
Oh,
involved.
there you go.
It's incredible. I mean, and also ignoring other things like the Syrians massacring each other
Yeah.
only last week.
Yeah.
Massacring Christians, massacring other
Well, there was
minorities.
the beheadings in Congo
I
not
know.
long ago.
50 Christians or 100 Christians
Yeah.
beheaded in Congo doesn't make any bullet of that
No,
news.
I always hold that up as the classic example of how skewed our reporting has become in the West, that we can't talk about that. We can't talk about what is effectively a genocide of Christians throughout Africa
No.
and Asia. Not allowed to talk
No,
about
but
it.
they love to talk about Christians being ill-treated by Israel, which is a complete farce.
Yeah.
Because the Christians in this country are pretty much protected, and it's the only
Well-
country in the Middle East where Christian population is actually growing.
Yes, yeah. No, for sure. In fact, it's the only country in the Middle East where Christians are properly protected.
Absolutely. So where do we go from here, David? Where do you go from here with
Well,
your
for
work?
me, I mean, a lot of what I do is reactive.
Right.
I try to keep my desk clear. I have long-term projects always. I mean, there's big ones. We're looking at Wikipedia all the time and
Yeah.
Amnesty
They've
International.
gone really terrible,
It's
Wikipedia.
look, it's always been bad.
Really?
Always. I was writing on Wikipedia about 9 years ago. The people who are butchering, they're online terrorists.
Yeah.
I mean, there are badges that editors get, and there's a specific badge that Wikipedia editors can have that says, I support resistance in all its forms, but I can't tell you who I support because of, obviously, legalities, with a question mark, and it's in the colours of Hezbollah.
Yeah, well, there you go.
And they're the people that are editing.
I'm just wondering, with the emergence now of AI, whether Wikipedia even has a future.
Well, you would hope. The problem is we have at the moment is one of the key sources that AI is using.
ChatGPT is Wikipedia.
Is Wikipedia.
Right.
And Wikipedia is, I mean, I don't know if you've seen the definition of Zionism, the page on Zionism.
Yeah.
I mean, in the first
It's a settler
paragraph,
colonialist enterprise, yeah.
our goal as Zionists was to have a Palestine free of, an area free of Palestinians. And,
Yeah.
I mean, it's very toxic, and they're very clever in what they do as well. The footprint of Jewish suffering is always reduced, and
It's always inflated.
Absolutely.
So Wikipedia is one of your long-term projects. What else?
Also, one of the things I'm working on now is Channel 4.
Yes.
Well, Channel 4 have won awards for their documentaries.
Right.
They've won the BAFTA and they've won an Emmy. So for me, it's kind of enticing. Because if I can get those documentaries, I can expose
Discredited.
something, then we can go for the awards.
Well, you could start also with the bogus Oscar-winning film from last 2 weeks ago. It's just incredible.
It is.
And then the news yesterday that the filmmaker was beaten up by settlers, and it turns out that he was throwing stones at
Yes, he
Jews,
was.
and the army basically arrested him.
But a part of the problem, of course, is our own community. I mean, we have the JW3 in the UK,
I know.
and the JW3 are putting on that movie.
They're putting on the movie.
They're putting on it.
Well, to me, I can understand, sometimes I can understand the haters, but to have Jews advocating for the other side, to me, it's something I'll never get over. It's something that I can't get over. It's what hurts me the most.
Yeah, and they're the most difficult people that we have to...
Because they're apologizing for their
They
existence and think that the enemy will love them more if they stand with them.
And they're used by the enemy to silence us.
Absolutely, they're
we
weaponized.
can't be anti-Semitised because
Look, we have a Jew over here.
That's it. But yeah, look, I mean, part of it, part of the anti-Zionist, Jewish thing, firstly, it's a minority. I think the bigger problem is actually the kind of the ones in the middle.
The ones who don't know and get influenced.
Well, they're kind of Zionists, but on their terms. So as long as Israel behaves the way that they believe Israel should behave, they'll be supportive. But, that's not Zionism.
No, that's not Zionism. That's just convenience.
For sure. Actually, there was a very toxic MP, Gerald Kaufman.
Yeah, I remember him.
Okay.
On Labour, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So he wrote a book in the early 1970s. It was called, I think, To Visit a Promised Land or something like this. And he was here. And you read the book and he comes across as a Zionist.
Yeah.
And you read it and you say, well, this guy, he loved Israel and his grandparents loved Israel and everything's great. But when you read between the lines, you can see it was a train wreck waiting to happen. Because Israel, look, we're a nation of the Middle East.
Yeah.
In the Middle East, with the neighbours that we have.
Yeah. And still keeping up, flying the flag for liberal Western values.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But we can't pretend that our neighbours are Belgium, although actually these days it's not, Belgium and Holland and places like this.
Yeah, well, they got there.
See what's
They're
going
getting
on
there too. No, but you're right. We're not Switzerland.
No.
We're living in a very rough neighbourhood.
And it's that attitude. You can tell that he was headed for that crash because he becomes disillusioned with Israel because it's not the Israel that,
Yeah. And in terms of the rise of Islamism in the UK and all of the terrible things that are coming out, nothing to do with Israel or Jews, but how women are treated, or those girls, and the terrible rape allegations and the rings and all sorts of that. Where is the normal, regular Brit in all of this? Are they beginning to get worried, or they're not there yet?
Well, look, the problem we have is that the UK, unlike the US, there's big differences between the different nations and what's taking place in them. We're more of a police state than the US is.
Yes.
So it's about what the state believes and wants. So if you come up against the state, or if you're pushing back against the state, you're in trouble. And at the moment, obviously, there's a lot of attention and focus being placed on multiculturalism, and how we should accommodate the growing Muslim populations and all of this. So if you come along and say there's a problem here, you're automatically platformed as a far-right racist.
Yeah.
Automatically, you're silenced. You're called an Islamophobe. They make up these words to.
Make up concepts.
Anti-Palestinian racism is the latest one, whatever that is.
Yeah.
But so it's a problem because I'm called I've been no platformed. I'm called a racist by members of our own community.
Yes.
And it's very difficult to get a voice.
Yeah.
When in that situation amongst the normal people. But having said that, I would imagine the vast majority of British people agree with me.
I hope that they become not the silent majority, but they just start being concerned about their own culture getting diluted. Because it's interesting, many moderate Muslims who just want to do what Jews have always done, integrate, be productive. But then you have this real hardcore of Islamists that really want to change the country according to their way of life. And that's what Britain, I think, has been too tolerant of.
Yes. Firstly, absolutely. Because they're also the ones that are driving the agenda.
Of course.
The government gets to choose which people it, uses as the middlemen.
Yeah.
For example, with the Jews, it's the Board of Deputies.
Yes.
The Board of Deputies are the middlemen. And the Board of Deputies are accommodating, apologists.
Yes.
And they love going and being invited to parties in the palace and so on and so forth. It was about finding middlemen within the Muslim community, and they chose badly every single time.
Interesting.
Every time.
You think they would have found the moderates,
they're trying.
The reformists, the coexistence people?
I think that there are issues within the Islamic community that make it more difficult.
Right.
In that, when you become moderate in Islam,
you get kicked out.
Well, you cease in the eyes of some. You cease to be a Muslim.
Yeah.
So we got situations where they're found. This is why I don't buy into the interfaith in the UK.
Yeah.
It's so false.
Yes.
A few weeks ago, we placed our chief rabbi at this meeting, and sitting alongside him are nobodies. And you think, why have we put our chief rabbi?
Our chief rabbi with people who don't represent the community.
Absolutely. because that's not interfaith.
Absolutely.
You know?
Well, this is fascinating, David, and your work is incredible. I think the whole world, if they weren't already awake, you woke them up a couple of weeks ago with your BBC research and how you really outed their very, very toxic agenda. And so I wish you a lot of strength. We thank you as a people for the incredible and brave work that you've done, really putting yourself, your life, physical life on the line, and putting your reputation on the line for doing the amazing work that very few people can do. So.
Well, I don't think there's much of a choice, to be honest. I just see this, I'm here, this is the fight that has to be fought.
It's a fight of our generation.
It is, and I don't think there's much of a choice, but thank you anyway, and it's been lovely to see you again.
Well, we love to have you on the show. We'd love to have you back, and good luck with everything.
Thanks very much, Fleur.